And so the interview went forward, 3.5 hours, and she was absolutely magnificent. But the words that haunted me and still do were when the police officer, when Lisa Evans was saying, "How many times did this happen to you, Hollie? How many times were you raped?" And she would just said the words over and over, over and over. It was horrifying. But she was fantastic. And I thought maybe we might make a bit of progress there. However, I'll go back a little bit in date time because I want to bring in Elisha Angelini at this point, who I was making allegations that she had been involved in the initial case. It's very unfortunate that he was promoted from Procurator Fiscal to Lord Advocate because the Lord Advocate is in charge of all criminal prosecutions in Scotland. So she is the top person in Scotland. Now, I had a few letters between myself and the Crown Office, and one in particular came from Andrew McIntyre, who's the head of Victims and Diversity there. And what Mr. McIntyre had to say was that he'd spoken to Mrs. Angelini, and she couldn't remember the case at all, didn't know anything about it, and wasn't even in situ at the time. Well, it is a matter of public record that Mrs. Angelini became Procurator Fiscal in Aberdeen on the 21st of July 2000, 5 weeks before Anne and Hollie reported the names of the other members of the rape gang. So I immediately pointed out to Mr. McIntyre that he was incorrect in that. The Procurator Fiscal was there at the time. Chronologically, we could prove that was the case. He started to get a little bit flustered about this, and he said, well, he said, it must have been some of the other people in her office who were dealing with the case, but Mrs. Angelini knows nothing about it. I said, are you serious? This is a case that's taken place in Aberdeen, not only of this magnitude, but someone we already know is a close personal associate of hers, Sheriff Graham Buchanan. And the boss was not told about this terrible case. Are you seriously telling me that? He said, well, no, he says, well, that's all I can think of. However, we had one other trump card to play that he didn't know about, and obviously Angelini did not know about. Because in our possession, we had a letter. And the letter was written by Brian Adam MSP, who was Anne's representative in the Scottish Parliament at the time. This letter, which we have a copy of, is dated the 27th of October 2000, 4 months, or was three months after Mrs. Angelini had taken office. The letter was written specifically to Mrs. Angelini, asking her what progress she was making on the case. Not only that, we have Mrs. Angelini has still gone on protesting that she knew nothing of the case, but I have a letter here with her name on it from the 12th of July 2001, specifically about Hollie's case, written from Angelini's office to Anne and Hollie's solicitor. So the Lord Advocate of Scotland has lied and lied again, and we can prove that. The rest of the case is going to be hard to get at because every obstruction is going to be placed in our way. But we've already established that the Lord Advocate, the head of all criminal prosecutions in Scotland, has lied. She's lied to the people of Scotland about her involvement in this case. There's no question about that. And if the Scottish Government were not corrupt, she would have been dismissed a long time ago, as I'd urged Mr. Salmond and Mr. McCaskill, the Justice Minister, to do. Now, returning to the case itself, again, we got the usual delays from the Crown Office, who's supposed to be investigating it. And in December, after sort of pressure to what's going on, we got a letter saying that the Crown Office had decided not to take any further action because there was insufficient evidence. Now, not only myself, but a team of very hard-working, highly intelligent and competent people in Scotland who can't be named at the present time have also been working very hard with me and with my clients on this case. And between us, we have established that the police did not interview a single named person other than Hollie. And Hollie named 24 people, as I could hear of, on the 8th of September in Shrewsbury. 16 abusers and 7 victims other than herself. 8 victims, she was one of them. 7 other child victims. So the police, Grampian Police, could not be bothered to interview a single member of the people who've been named. We also discovered that in the earlier investigation in 2000, when they were first supposed to look at the case, the one that was blocked by Angelini, they actually only interviewed Dennis Mackey, the father, and the son, Greg Mackey, 2 years later, which they had admitted to. However, once again, I have a document here written by an officer of the Grampian Police called Innes Walker, and this is dated the 7th of May 2003, and in it here he refers that there 11 people have been named. It should have been 14 other than the father and the brother, and that he's investigated it. But the police have said they only talked to 2 people. So, once again, absolute nonsense, lies by the Grampian Police. And we know that they have done exactly the same thing in 2009. Nothing should affect Mrs. Angelini. Nothing should be done to embarrass this poor woman who is Lord Advocate of Scotland. No matter what she's done, no matter how many children have been abused and raped at this present time, the Lord Advocate of Scotland does not want to be embarrassed because she's involved in it. And the Scottish Government are colluding in this disgraceful conduct. Now, what we've been doing since the 4th of December was to keep more pressure on, and fortunately some of the media in Scotland, like the Firm and the Press and Journal in Aberdeen, have been very good in putting information out. Now, on the 17th of November, the Firm put out a strong story attacking Angelini's involvement. Of course, they got the paperwork that we provided for them, and they very courageously went in, and they were the first real people in Scotland to really do so in a big way, to attack Angelini. Immediately, a team was sent from Angelini's office at the Crown Office, more or less threatening to put the Firm out of business unless they did a retraction and an apology straight away. The Firm did this, but it was under the most severe duress. I think if they'd been able to stood their ground, any court action would never have got. It was a big bluff. But it's all right for me to say that. The Firm has 40 employees. They were on the spot at the time, and I can understand why they perhaps made that concession at the time. But they know as well as we do that Angelini and the rest of them have been up to no good. Now, the other thing that we discovered a little bit later on was that Mrs. Angelini had secretly been using a private law firm to do this. A law firm, an Edinburgh law firm, a very eminent firm in Scotland called Levy and McRae. And the person responsible for this was the senior partner in Levy and McRae, a man called Peter Watson. Now, I contacted Mr. Watson when I discovered this information, which he thought was top secret. And I said to him, Mr. Watson, would you tell me first if you actually been dealing with on behalf of Mrs. Angelini, and if so, is Mrs. Angelini paying your fees, which we would have no quarrel with if that's the case, or is it being paid by the Scottish taxpayer? Is it being purloined from public funds, which is a totally different reason indeed. If the Lord Advocate has been perverting the course of justice, and now she is using public money to conceal the facts of the story from the Scottish public, that is a serious matter and a criminal matter. Mr. Watson got very embarrassed, sent a rather offensive email back to me saying, who the hell are you, type of thing, why should I talk to you? And I just said, well, it's up to you, Mr. Watson. You can answer the question or you can't. Anyway, he still refused to answer it. We do have a document, which I haven't got with me, and it's a kind of a privileged one at the moment, but we have a document to show that, yes, he was, and he threatened one of the information providers with defamation if they mentioned anything more about Angelini's involvement in this case. We also know that he sent general threats to every editor in Scotland, saying that they would be most severely dealt with if any of them ever mentioned Mrs. Angelini's connection in any way with the Hollie Greig case. So we have a high-level attempt to intimidate the press of Scotland, the media of Scotland, and the whole of the UK, because Google have been threatened as well. Now, I'm going to go back with one other item, and one very sinister item, because at the moment we are using everything we can, the documentation, to actually bring the people to justice. It's a hard job when you've got the police, the judiciary, and the politicians who are in power in Scotland at the moment, all against you, who don't want to stop this case, going ahead, despite the overwhelming weight of evidence. I'm absolutely sure if it was Angus and Aggie who've got the chip shop in Gorbals, they'd have been banged up in jail years ago. But because it's Sheriff Buchanan, because Angelini is involved, everything has to be blocked. And police officers, because not only is the police officer Terry Major involved, but two other police officers, Leanne Davidson, which we know,